Welcome, everyone, and thank you so very much for joining me for another episode of Talking Cloud. Now, this is where we talk about cloud computing, anything, all things cloud. I mean, it is such an enormous word. It's getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and we're all using it in more and many different ways. As you know, I'm no expert, but I do know where to find them, and I've really been hunting hard, and I think I've got a great one for today's program. I mean, I'm really super excited. Years ago, he was an engineer for Department of Justice, was at Booz Allen Hamilton Predictive Systems. He founded a company, Real Ops. This is back in the early 2000s, was a vice president at BMC, managing director at Helix Ventures. I mean, it goes on. Chairman and co-founder at App 47, chairman of the board at the Windward Foundation. He's president and CEO founder for enterprise software IT company Windward Consulting. I don't know if I got that exactly right. He'll be able to get me straight. And I believe currently is president and CEO and founder at RedMonocle. And I'm super excited to have Sean McDermott on the program today. Sean, welcome. Thank you so much for coming on to Talking Cloud.
Thank you, Grant. I appreciate you having me.
Yeah, it's awesome. So why don't you take some time, since you have much more detailed insight on your Z-axis and your life and how your journey has got you to where you are and what you're up to. Why don't you take a minute and talk about that?
Sure. I forgot about half of those. So I started I'm an electrical engineer. I have a bachelor's in engineering. I got a master's in engineering too. I started my career at Department of Justice as a lowly engineer trainee. It was a great experience actually working there. And eventually I moved into consulting. I always knew I wanted to be in the consulting business and really kind of focus on helping our people solve complex problems. So from there I went to Booz Allen, which at the time was probably one of the top leading consulting firms in the country. And then I formed my own company called Windward Consulting Group back in 1997. So that Windward still runs today. It's been 24 years.
Wow.
And we've been
Kudos
around for a while.
Kudos to you for that. Man, that's an accomplishment.
Yeah. We're real proud of what we've done there. I mean, we worked with, well over 500 Fortune 500 companies and large telecommunication providers, 6,000 projects, and more. But along the way, I've been lucky enough to create a few companies out of Windward where we were working on certain software projects and were able to codify some of our consulting methodologies. And the first one was Real Ops, which we founded in 2004. And I ran that company for 3 years until we sold it to BMC. I stayed on at BMC for about a year, running their service automation, worldwide service automation division. So all the IT automation products fell under that portfolio. And then I swore I'd never do another software company, and I've done 2 more since. So one thing I've learned as a serial entrepreneur is never say never.
Right.
And so we started at 47 in 2011. That's focused on mobile application management. And our latest foray is RedMonocle, where we started that in 2018. And we are focused on what we call cyber risk quantification, which is a mouthful, but we like to call it CRQ. And that's we're spending a lot of time in the cyberspace right now. So helping CISOs, really understand their cyber risk and how to provide deep analytics on where they should be making investments and understanding where their gaps might be to compliance frameworks and things like that, so they can just really be much more strategic about their cyber risk.
Got it. So what do you call that again?
It's called RedMonocle.
Right. No,
the space, we call it CRQ, Cyber Risk Quantification.
Cyber Risk Quantification. And so is this a software product, or is this a series of tools or a framework and a process, or all of the above?
It's actually a SaaS platform, and it allows us. We have a very proprietary knowledge base, and in that knowledge base is a very deep understanding of cyber tools in the marketplace. We have well over 400 cyber tools in there that we done a lot of deep analysis on their capabilities and features and functionalities. We also have brought in a number of the standard frameworks around 853 and ISO 27002 and NIST CFF. And what our platform does is it allows you to look at your technologies and your investments compared to these frameworks, identify gaps that you might have in those areas, and use that information to develop planning to fill those gaps, or look at your overlaps, because there's a lot of overspending going on in cyber right now.
Yep.
Companies have bought so many tools over the past years that they've bought duplicate capabilities and things like that.
Right.
So there's an opportunity for better investment strategy of consolidation, but also using that consolidation as well as our platform to understand how to fill some of the gaps of frameworks that you might not have covered all the way. And then the other thing that's very unique about what we've done is we've been able to map the framework, the controls, cyber controls, to business objectives, because one of the challenges that cybersecurity leaders have is articulating very technical things to non-technical people.
Yep.
And a CISO, for example, they have to convince other people, like the CFO and the CEO and even the CIO sometimes, to make investments in cybersecurity. A lot of CISOs are trying to get a seat at the table and work with boards and helping boards understand cyber risk. But these boards and some of these executives just don't understand the technology, and they don't understand what controls are. They don't understand what endpoint protection is. So we've been able to, using some very proprietary analytics and algorithms, to map these controls into business metrics so that you can now talk to the CFO about risk to your supply chain. You can talk to your marketing person about cyber risk as compared to brand reputation and brand protection. So you can start having a very different conversation with people who need to understand risk but don't have the background to truly understand the nuts and bolts of it.
Yep. Very interesting. So it's translating the risk in cyber in their particular language or context for the business is what it sounds like, right?
Correct. We've done. I've been working with security leaders for a long time. We actually did a cybersecurity benchmark study. We're about to release the results. I think it's in final design. It should be coming out next week or two. So if anybody wants it, they can go to redmonocle.com, and it should be right on the front page there.
Okay, terrific.
Free download. But one of the things that we found is that security leaders sometimes don't feel very supported by the business, which must be it's a kind of hard thing, right? You're brought in to basically protect the business, but at the same time, you may not be getting the resources you need and able to convince people of what the seriousness of the risk is. So you may not be able to get the funding and the investment that you need to do your job. I think that there's a combination of problems here, but I think one of the problems is that the security leaders need to be able to translate that risk into a language that people understand. and requiring CEOs and CIOs are a little bit different, but CFOs and finance directors and things like that to understand the complexities of cyber risk is just it's just not going to happen, right?
No.
So CISOs really need to kind of change their game and work with these people in a language that they understand, right? And they understand, employee satisfaction, client experience, like I said, supply chain.
Sure.
They understand things like that. So if you can relate risk to those factors, then they'll start to understand, like, oh, so our risk score around the customer experience could be higher, and what's the impact of that, and how can we make an investment specifically in the app, because we want to make sure that our customer experience is very high,
right,
and wouldn't be affected by some type of denial of service attack or something like that.
Right. Yeah, I think that's this has been a challenge for a long, long time, but you talk about the challenges in getting budget, and I think that in this day today, currently, based on the last year, what we've been through and everything else, the supply chain attacks we've seen, right? Solar winds kind of really rattled our cage. While the economy is actually less, even though it's coming back to looking like it's growing, it's less than it was in 2019, but yet companies are expected to bolster their controls, improve threat hunting capabilities. I think there's a real dichotomy in enterprises today, and what you're speaking of, I think, is desperately needed, and that's how can I do more with less? And I think that duplication you mentioned is a real interesting one, with the number of vendors that are always looking on the other, looking to broaden their capabilities, right? Do you find a lot of people that have tools that they can eliminate one or two because the one they have also could do those other things?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. So it really comes down to two things. One is there is duplication out there of tools. So they may have multiple, endpoint protection systems. They may have multiple security, information systems, right, and monitoring systems. And that happens organically sometimes through M&A and things like that. They bring in a platform, they bring in a company, and they inherit all that technology, and then they never really kind of migrate it together. The other thing is that you've got this, the vast majority of software in IT is actually underutilized. So you may have software out there, software tools that are very capable of doing the job. They just haven't been configured the correct way, or they haven't been upgraded in a couple of years, and those upgrades have actually brought in a lot of new features.
Right.
So we see like this as a two-way problem, right? And the challenge here is, how do you maintain all this information about your tool set when every single tool is changing, every quarter?
Yep.
Right. I mean, companies are out there, and they're even we as RedMonocle, I mean, we do iterative sprints, and we're releasing new upgraded versions of our software potentially, every 4 weeks, right? So
or more frequently, right? I mean, the fact
correct.
is, when we start to move into this whole new world of cloud and application development in the cloud and SaaS, I mean, you're right. It's always churning. Where before we had Windows that seemingly were, longer strides, right? We got a new version, and we're not going to get another new version. We might get a few iterative versions on the way there, right? But now you can have huge leaps, and they can occur bang, 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 right, one after the other.
Absolutely. And when we were in a world of perpetual licensing, right? Yep. And you and I have been around the block a while, right? 10 years ago, that was our whole world, right? Yep. On-prem, perpetual license product, software. it was hard to do an upgrade, right? So you get an upgrade, a new release would come out once a year. And like you said, iterative releases would come out once a quarter, and you kind of may or may not upgrade to them because you don't have time. Well, now these software applications, like you said, are upgrading rapidly.
Yep.
And that's what we want too, right? We will move to the cloud. We want agility. We want features now. So what's happening is it takes a lot of time for organizations to understand what is happening with all these investments they made in software. And we're talking about millions of dollars in investments.
Yeah.
And how they're changing rapidly. And so you can't even keep up, right? So if you're sitting there as a security leader going, how is my security stack, working to what I need to have done? And we'll get to the other half of that, what I need to have done in a minute.
Right.
How do you know that when it's changing constantly, right? Because you're going to need a team of people out there just researching, like, where are we at on this product? What's the latest version? What are the newest features that came out? Are they applicable to us? We don't, it's a tremendous amount of work. So it just doesn't happen.
Yep.
Right.
You're exactly right.
So we have a knowledge base that does all that, right? And we have a team of analysts, and that's their job. They're on every day researching new products and new versions and updating this knowledge base. So that whole idea of researching what you have completely goes away. Right? All you have to do is identify that you have this product and this version, bring it into your portfolio within our platform, and we take care of everything for you. We will dynamically research, and everything changes. The flip side of it is trying to figure out, okay, now that I know what I'm invested in, what do I need to have done? Like, what am I working against? And I use this analogy all the time. What's my destination? Like,
right.
And in the world of security, your destination might be, NIST 853 moderate, right? Or it might be ISO 27002, or it might be FISMA, or a combination of all of these, right? A lot of companies, they start out with, NIST CSF critical controls, which are about 20 controls. But that's not the end point, right? That's just a waypoint on their journey of cyber hygiene. And so what we do is we bring these frameworks, and then we compare the stack to those frameworks. So if we say that, if you're saying, I want to be NIST CSF certified, we will actually analyze your portfolio and tell you whether you're making the right investments to be CSF certified. And once you're at that point, then you can say, okay, now we want to bring on another level. This is going to be really, really important in the government space. Well, it's important everywhere. Let me say that. It's literally critical everywhere based on everything you just said about, cybersecurity's importance and this colonial and, the list just goes on, right?
Yep.
This is really going to get interesting in the Defense Department and in the Defense Industrial Base, the DIB, because they're mandating CMMC level 1 through 5. So depending on what you do with the government, and there's thousands and thousands of government contractors out there, everything from, people who supply, paper products to build satellites, right, and build ships. And all the subcontractors involved in all this, we're talking about billions and billions of dollars in contracts. They're going to be requiring every single one of these companies to be CMMC level certified. And
CMMC certified, explain that without the acronym.
So basically what it is, it's a framework of a set of controls that the Defense Department is going to require that you adhere to in order to do business with them.
Yep.
The higher level maturity relates to the more government information and systems you interact with. So if you're a small company and you contribute, you sell things to the government, but you're not handling any information from them except for maybe a contract, you'll have to be CMMC level 1 at a minimum. And that alone is, not the easiest thing in the world for a small company, right?
Right.
And so, but it's going to be, it's going to be the ticket to entry, right? But if you're a government contractor that's building satellites and you have your own secure facilities and you're analyzing government data, or let's say you're an analyst firm working for an intel that's consuming data coming in from the field, and you're doing threat analysis of this data coming in, you might have to be level 5, which is going to be really, really stringent.
Yep.
So as companies want to do work for the government or for the Department of Defense, they're going to have to adhere to CMM level C, and they may start at level 1 and then move to level 2 and level 3 and level 4. So I always kind of talk about this as a journey, and these are destinations along the way. So what we're able to do is bring in these frameworks and create these destinations. And like say, so your first destination is like NIST, CSF, cybersecurity framework. 20 critical controls. You do that. Once you get that done, then you move to CSF, full CSF. From there, you might move into, say, NIST 853 moderate. But you also might be doing work with the Department of Defense, so you might also be moving into CMM level 3, right? So there's all these frameworks that come into play, and we use those frameworks really as the map of what standards you should and controls you should be adhering to, and then mapping it back to what you've invested in and the technology you have to find out where you're at. And back to your original question, there's overlaps, and there's a real opportunity for security leaders to be looking and say, hey, look, we might be able to save some money here by consolidating in these few areas and moving those investments into areas where we're not covered enough, right? But right now it's very difficult, because they just don't know. It's like they know they have tools out there. They don't really know necessarily what the costs are, how much they're paying for these tools, what the support costs are.
Yep.
In 30 years of doing this, I've asked senior IT leaders and security leaders 3 questions. How many tools do you have? How much are you paying? And how are those tools working for you? And I've yet to get an answer, because they just don't know.
Yeah, that's true. I'm looking through here, Sean. I looked up CMMC, and now I don't feel quite so badly, because I see that it was a program announced on January 31st, 2020. So this is pretty fresh stuff, but it reads, the primary goal is to improve the surety and security of controlled, unclassified information, CUI, and federal contract information, FCI, that is in the possession and use of their federal contractors. So this, I guess the reason I read that, Sean, was, for me, from what I know, this is a huge issue that I'll bet there's a lot of people that don't really have a clue when they get the letter from the federal government that says, hey, you need to be CMMC 3 certified to continue to do business with us.
Yeah. What's really interesting is that there are a lot. FISMA is a standard by which companies that interact with federal systems need to be certified.
Yep.
There are many companies that go out there and sign contracts with the government. They win an RFP and they start operating and things like that, and completely forget the fact that they have to be FISMA certified until all of a sudden they get a letter one day saying, hey, we need confirmation that you guys are FISMA certified. And then this could be 2 years after the contract, because the government moves slow. Right. And then all of a sudden it's like mad dash, like, oh no, we never got FISMA certified, right? So, this is going to be a big impact for a lot of companies. I think, a lot of the larger companies that they're already working on this, right?
Yep.
But there's so many small companies that just don't know. And I will tell you that I've been doing work with the government for 20 years. So I'm on all kinds of mailing lists, and I'm getting inundated with CMMC readiness, emails from all kinds of companies, and most of them are small, single person auditing shops or things like that are really marketing CMMC. The interesting thing about CMMC is that, it was signed in 2020, has yet to be implemented. right? The idea is that it ultimately will be audited, and there will be CMMC certified auditors, much like a financial audit, like a
PCI or something.
Yeah, or like an Ernst and Young, right? Ernst and Young will come in and audit you against GAAP standards, right?
Yep,
And everyone, and everyone, because they're certified and then they're certified public accountants, then they, that's taken as, the gospel when they come in.
Right.
So CMMC is doing the same thing, and they're going to be signing up auditors to come in and audit these companies. And the auditors, they haven't even figured out the auditing process yet. So there's still a few more years. And now CMMC is kind of stalled out because the DoD is now coming back in and looking at it and saying, is this being implemented correctly? So it's going to be a few more years, but it's coming, right? It's going to come in some shape or form. And by the way, even if it's slow, these companies, and we all as companies need to be taking cybersecurity seriously, right? And as I talk about, my companies, there's kind of multiple levels of me understanding why this is important to me and my company. And one is, do I have a regulatory requirement? So in the case of my consulting company, we have a regulatory requirement with the Department of Defense and CMMC to adhere to. Pretty black and white.
Right.
Do we have contractual requirements with our customers? And we do a lot of work with Fortune 500 companies, and I sign contracts all the time for about data, with controls in there for data protection, things like that.
Right.
So we're obligated to protect our customers' data. So I have to think about that. That's kind of the next level, not a regulatory control, but a contractual control.
Right.
Need. And then there's just me as a CEO, right? So my customers don't care about my internal employee system because their data is not there. But I have an obligation to my employees,
right?
I have to protect their data. There's social security numbers and all accounting information and bank, I don't know if we have bank accounts, but our payroll systems do.
Sure.
So I have an obligation as the CEO to protect my employees, right? So we as CEOs of companies, we need to be taking all this very seriously. And unfortunately, it's complicated stuff, and a lot of companies don't have the expertise to really do this well and need all the help they can get.
Yep.
And, and the harder thing is that, only one person, I mean, this is a statistic I just read the other day. I'll make sure I get this right. There's only one qualified person for every 2 cybersecurity job openings right now. So you can't even get the people. You can't get the talent, right? And if you're a smaller company, where do you think someone with a cybersecurity background and they're going to go to a higher paid organization, right? So they need all the help they can get. And, this is where we come in as RedMonocle, is to help them really understand their cyber environment. So you don't need to be an expert on frameworks and controls and security tools and things like that. We can come in and actually do that for you and help you understand what's going on. But we can also work with, we're working with one of the biggest healthcare companies in the world. And the same thing, so everyone has this need. It's just, scale is really probably the big difference.
Sure. Well, and, Sean, in my opinion, there was a time in the early days that you and I both recall when you cracked the cellophane off the outside of that monstrous Lotus 123 or Word Perfect or what. I mean, obviously this is dating myself.
I'm not going to confirm or deny that I know what you're talking about right now.
But there was also an investment that you made in really reading and learning, because it seemed like the pace of the business allowed that time and investment because the benefit was so significant, right? But today, 2 things are happening. The pace of change that we've already talked about, right? The iterations and the number of new features and capabilities, they're coming and it's moving so fast. And the competitive forces of today's environment, the business forces that keep everything taut, right? Everything. I mean, There's competitors on every corner. It just seems like people can't afford not to invest in experts. Otherwise, they're going to just get crushed.
Yeah, I think the one thing that we could probably all agree on right now is that evolution is speeding up.
Oh.
Right? And the idea that 10 years ago you could start a fashion company, right? And reach millions of dollars in sales in months.
Yep.
Right, versus taking years to do that is mind-boggling now, because the technology is just accelerated so much that you can have your shopping infrastructure up in hours. You can have all your purchasing tools implemented with that shopping capability on something like Shopify or something like that.
Yep.
It's just and then if you're in, and let's say you're just in a you want to build a SaaS platform. I mean, you just have to. Everything is available to you now. You just and the no code technologies.
Add water and shake, man.
Yeah.
It's add water and shake. It's just, it is.
And the capabilities around these things are just phenomenal, and it's just getting faster.
I mean, come on. You were talking earlier about the number of capabilities in the software programs companies buy, but just go take a look at AWS. Or Azure or Google, and look at the pace of new things that they're offering, new capabilities, new programs, new functions, I mean, to your point, 10 years ago, Kubernetes, but now some, 50 or more % of enterprises are using it. Mm-hmm. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah, and I think the thing the pandemic has at least taught me, and I think some of my peers, is that technology is enabling everything. Like, you can't really have a business anymore that's not technologically enabled in some way.
Yep.
Because you're just going to be beaten by somebody who does.
Exactly.
Right? And so if you're a landscaper and you're basically, mailing bills out and requiring people to write checks, I think, the first person that comes along and says, hey, I can landscape your lawn and you can pay using, Apple Pay or Google Pay.
Or Venmo.
And it'll all be your Venmo.
Yeah.
You're being like, yeah, let's do that.
Yeah.
Right. And the speed of change, you can move so fast, right? Off of one. So like you said, competition is one bad experience away, right? So
exactly. One click
and you're just
away.
On to the next thing. And one click away, and you can move off of one thing to another. And that's a really challenging thing if you're a business, right? It's like, how do you continue to invest in technology? Because there's millions of businesses out there that just don't understand technology.
Oh, and those are the businesses, Sean, that when they do finally get a website up or whatever, and they have reviews, and they have 3 reviews, and somebody gives them a bad review. And because they haven't cultivated and exercised the review process and really built up a lot of people and encouraged them to give them positive reviews, that can be devastating to a company that all of a sudden now they're hanging out in the internet, right? They're out the window, and it says their total stars are 1.3, and there's only 7 reviews. I mean, that kind of stuff for the younger generation particularly, that really matters. Well, go to another one. Find someone that's got more reviews.
Yeah, I just did a move in the fall, and I went to somebody who I thought would know really well, and they recommended this company to me. And I was like, great. I went and looked at their review. The review was awful.
Yeah.
They had an awful review. So, I just overrode my friend who gave me the recommendation, who was very knowledgeable in this space, and went to the guy that had the 5-star review. It was that quick, Yep. And the people who had the low review, they never even knew I made that decision.
That's right.
And so you're right. There's a whole new dichotomy in the economy right now of how do you use technology, but when you start down this path, you also have to be able to use it right, and there's a whole other process around cultivating. And you're right, the younger generation gets it. The social media generation gets
Yep.
what likes mean.
Yep. Yep.
People, older people, may not understand that, like, what 100 likes mean. Like, oh, likes are stupid. Well, they're actually, they go viral, and when they go viral, things create sales, and those sales go viral, and that's how you have somebody who creates a product that you never heard of yesterday, and tomorrow is the hottest thing on the internet, selling millions.
So, it's interesting. I wish I could remember the gentleman's name and the precise description, but he explained how crowdsourcing is actually unbelievably accurate. When you get a crowd, and he would go on talks and he'd walk out a bull on the stage and then ask all of the audience to guess the weight of the bull. And by eliminating the fringes, right, the extreme high and the extreme low, and going back and averaging, the audience is almost every time correct. It's pretty amazing. And it has to do with when you get a sampling that is large enough and objective enough. Now, reviews may be a different thing than something as specific as weight, right? On how heavy is this? But it speaks to the influence of that social media, and I found that really interesting. But before I forget it, I want to ask you about something else that I think is really an interesting transformation that's taken place because of the internet as well. And it's the fact that we now live in a world where before the internet, in order for 10 million eyeballs to see Sean McDermott, you had to be on HBO or ABC, NBC, CBS, or something, right? I mean, your stage had to be one that reached that population density, that audience. Whereas today, you get a video that a few people start to share, and you can have 1 million followers in just about any genre. So we have it's just an interesting social fabric now with so many different opportunities to have 1 million followers of this or this, of fancy red shoes or ponytails or whatever else. It's really interesting. I'm curious what you think.
Oh, I have a lot of thoughts on this, but I would boil it down to this. You're absolutely right. And going back 10 years ago, 15 years ago, and so conventional marketing is extremely expensive. And you're marketing across a wide group of people who you have no idea whether they are your core customer or not.
Hit or miss.
Right? So,
yeah.
Hit or miss. So you're going to advertise on late night TV, Johnny Carson. You have no idea. I mean, you have a general idea, right? They're probably older people, right? Maybe tending male. I mean, so you have these like Nielsen things that kind of help you get into the thing. And if you advertise in Vanity or Vogue or something like that. But it was extremely expensive.
Yep. Extremely
expensive. And now you have, look at someone like Kylie Jenner. Right. Now, granted, she was on the TV show and things like that, but she's at a place right now where she gets, I think, $1 million for a product placement on her Instagram, and it's free. She doesn't pay any marketing costs for that, and she makes $1 million through that. And you can create a new product and go on TikTok, and it can go viral. and you can be selling tens of thousands of them, and you didn't pay a dime in marketing.
Yep.
Right. So the whole industry is upside down based on this, and people who don't understand that, are not going to come out of this as winners.
Yep.
Right. Because, and here's the thing, if you can, they have their tribes, right? So these influencers out there, and by the way, do I like the fact that somebody, who really hasn't, done any hard work is now an influencer and making a lot of money? I don't know. I mean, people could look at it and be like, oh, that's so unfair, whatever. But it doesn't matter, right? Because they're in a position now where they have so many followers and they cultivated this following, this tribe, that if that's your tribe that you're trying to sell something to, they can make incredible amounts of money, through just, endorsing things through their social media. Yep. It's fascinating. It really is. And when you start really digging into it, it just gets even more interesting, and how you can, because in the end, like a good marketing team, you have to understand your core audience, and you have to understand what drives that audience emotionally and where do they hang out. Yep. And you get those three things lined up, you can be incredibly successful.
Yeah, I'm thinking to myself, Sean, I find it kind of interesting, the clash of industries, and I'm talking specifically about, you've got the radio market, right? Pop radio, music, that is clashing with this whole digitization of music. And this is a perfect example of where, if you're a musician that can cultivate a following of 1 million people, you don't have to be famous to be successful, right? You don't have to be globally famous to make a very good living and to again be successful, and not really that many people may know about you, where that really wasn't possible. The gap between a successful artist and all of the other artists was just so much of a greater chasm than it seems to be today.
Oh yeah, I mean, you think back, I'm a big music lover, right? And you go back into the 70s and 80s and the 90s, right, where everything was driven by record labels. You needed to be with a record label, right? Yeah. Because they had the distribution, they had the promotion. Yeah. So you had to be signed to be heard. Yeah. Right? You can't play enough small clubs. Eventually, even when you do that, you're doing that to get a record label, right?
Exactly.
To get that distribution. That's why you're playing all these clubs.
And they took a big piece of hide to get that label.
Yeah, they took it amazing. And sometimes they took all the hide, right? Yeah. Now you can create music and put it up on SoundCloud, right? And through that, get a digital audience, not a digital, a real audience, right? You get to 1 million people. And then you can put out your own music. Right? Yep. You can self-publish music. We can self-publish books. We can everything now. So everything, the models change up, and getting back to cloud, right, is everything's being driven by cloud now, right? Because all these things where if you order a book, you self-publish a book and you order it to Amazon, Amazon's using their cloud infrastructure to literally print books on demand. Yep. Right. And you look at the fitness industry and what Peloton, is doing as far as, guided trained tours, right? And they solved a huge problem, right, of people not wanting to go to gyms for a number of reasons, not only logistics, but for self-esteem reasons, right? Yeah. And now they can exercise in their home with, high quality trainers, and that's all driven by the cloud. And, where I think about it is the cloud is exciting to me, right? And what's going on in the cloud and the potential and where it's going. But what really, I tend to, like back in the day when at the Department of Justice, we installed the first IP network in the private government, powered by a small company called Cisco, right? And So we were on the forefront of that. And while everybody was out there saying, I want to be the next CCIE and build networks, I started thinking about it from a manageability. I was like, how are we going to manage all this stuff? How are we going to manage these distributed IP networks? So I kind of made my career in that. And now, as I look at cloud, I'm thinking the same thing going as people are building new cloud applications. I'm like, how are we going to secure this?
Yeah.
Because we're moving so fast in the pandemic, we moved, there's companies that moved, 1,000-person call centers out of a building in a week.
Yep.
A week before that, if you ask them, hey, would you ever think about moving your call center to remote to home base? They'd be like, we will never ever do that.
Yep.
A week later, they're moving everybody home.
Yep. I think there was a lot of ready, fire, aim, because they were told you got to shoot now.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
So this is something I've said is I think that a lot of people, this was forced on them. They all made it work somehow, where they had 8 people using the VPNs and now they had 800, and everything was overwhelmed. And so they were just hobbling stuff together and maybe foregoing some of the best hygiene with regards to security to make sure they got it done. And now we're going back trying to get things righted.
Yeah, that's exactly what we're doing. And the one thing you can say about the human spirit is that we rise to the challenge.
Right.
And if you would have told anybody on this planet that what would happen in case of a pandemic, everyone, I don't think anybody would have been like, this is possible. And it happened, right? Yeah. It literally happened. And here massive amounts of people move home, and we had a lot of growing pains, but we kind of got through it. But it also created a vast amount of vulnerabilities, right? And it's, I'm not saying that SolarWinds and Exchange and Colonial Pipeline and, are the result of the pandemic and us moving fast, because some of those things have been in play for a while. But, cybersecurity now has just become really at the forefront of like, we got to protect our stuff. And I would tell you, one of the things that I'm really, really happy to see is this administration taking cybersecurity seriously, right? And because what's shocking to me about the Colonial Pipeline is we've been talking about the vulnerability of critical infrastructure for years.
Yep.
Years.
Yep.
And they got taken down by a ransom attack, right? So I look at that going, what are we doing? Like, what are we as a economy? Are we just putting our head in the sand on some of the stuff? Because if anybody should have been listening, it's the energy industry, right?
Yeah,
and the
right.
grids, because they've been talking about it for 10 years. Like we're vulnerable, and then it happens, and everyone's kind of surprised, And now that you're seeing like, gas shortages and stuff like that. Maybe that it's getting people to take this stuff more seriously, but we've got to understand like what our vulnerabilities are, and that's where we try to get back to is like, okay, well, what is our destination here? What are we trying to do? Like, what is the standards that by which we're going to measure ourselves against? Because if we don't measure ourselves against some standard, then we just don't know how we measure up.
Yeah.
Right?
You said something, Sean, that I thought was really good, and you just brought it up again. And I really think that it's an important thing to mention again. I think as we are all traveling at the speed of cloud, light speed, streaking by our side windows, we're just going so fast. And everyone's flying, but I don't think everyone does consciously have a destination, as you mentioned. And I think that's a really good point. What are you striving for? What are you building for? What are you trying to get to? Because I've said for years, if you don't have a destination, if you don't have a goal, you don't have an objective, how are you going to ever know if you've gotten there? How are you going to know if you're making progress? So I think that that's a very insightful comment, remembrance for everybody listening in terms of cybersecurity. I think that really is key. And I think also the fact that things are moving so fast, and they're certainly not slowing down. This forced pandemic is really, I think, you put it right. How's that phrase go? Necessity is the mother of invention. I mean, we are resilient, and I now think what we're going to see going forward, Sean, won't look like it did in 2019. I believe that there's too many organizations that are saying, hey, yeah, I know you need to go see customers, but do you need to travel that much? Do we need to have that many in-person events? Because we just got through demonstrating how much we could accomplish without them.
Yeah, I as somebody who's traveled 2 million miles, almost every week for the last 25 years.
Yeah.
And having not traveled now I have actually been traveling back and forth from my home in Florida to Washington, D.C., where my companies are. I am starting to, it's so obvious that it is incredibly inefficient. And how it upsets rhythms and patterns, and how it's just wasteful in time. Do I think travel is necessary? I think some travel is necessary, but what came out of this pandemic, which I think is great, is the fact that we were all forced into a remote situation. Not some of us, we all were. So now that we've all been we're all now seeing some of the benefits of it, and some of the disadvantages, but definitely some of the benefits of, hey, we don't need to fly out there to have a meeting. We can do it over Zoom, right? So maybe instead of us flying out every month to meet with you, we'll fly out every 4 months, and we'll do everything else on Zoom. And now it's just become natural.
Yep.
And so we'll see how it goes. And I think that we'll see how companies manage this back to work. There's an interesting article in the New York Times this morning just about how messy this going back to work could actually really be for companies.
Yeah.
It's not gonna be smooth.
71%, I saw in some study, 71% of the employees asked said they don't want to go back to full-time, back to the office. So I think it is going to be interesting. And I think one of the things I know for us, so it can be so costly, and you hit the nail on the head, inefficient, sitting in a bus in the air for 2 hours. It takes 5 hours. By the time you spend more money to get a car or get transported, and then spend more money to have a bed to sleep in, and spend more money to eat food that you have in your refrigerator at home, all to sit down and meet for 35, 45 minutes or an hour to leave. It really does beg the question, do we need to keep doing it like we used to? And I think the verdict is out. I think it's a no. So
yeah, I think it's a no too. And I will tell you, 90% of my company's staff do not want to go back to work full time in the office. 90%. The world has spoken.
Yeah, that's right. Technology's here. Let's leverage it. Let's use it. That's not to say I don't love human contact, but if I can get more done and still be able to spend time with my family and the ones that mean the most to me, I think that's what matters. And it gives me a better quality of life overall, or at least I feel like it.
Yeah, and I don't think it takes away from the experience, right? The client experience and what they're trying to get, because in the end, I own a consulting company, right? Been around for 24 years. We are in the people business.
Yeah.
Like people are our product. Relationships are the key to everything that we do. 80% of our business is repeat business and expansion business of existing customers. I mean, we need to be, connected to our customers to ensure the customer experience that we want to give and what they deserve. It's pretty apparent now that we don't actually have to be face to face to make that happen.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's right.
It's a nice to have that we'll do it. We will do it, right? But we don't have to do it as much.
That's right.
It's not going to, it's kind of funny if you basically talk to somebody today who's now just coming into the workforce, right? Let's say they came into the workforce on, April 2020, and now been in for coming up a year and a half and are working remote and doing all this stuff. And you said, yeah, I used to travel, 2 hours to have a 45-minute meeting, go in the night before. They would look at you like, are you nuts? Like, why would you ever do that? And you sit there and go, yeah, we did that all the time.
Or another one might be, I used to get up at 5 every morning so I could drive in, and it was 32 miles, but it took an hour and a half to get to the office, right? When you think of the logic behind that, when you can get the stuff done, and it just doesn't make sense. But I think you hit the nail on the head. The world has voted. And so I think we can all expect we're going to be working from home. But, Sean, I got to say, this has been very interesting. You've really brought out some great points. And I think what you really reminded me to remind my listeners is, hey, hire the experts, man. Get the experts, folks like Sean and his organization, to help you, because there's just too much at risk if you don't. So, Sean, thank you very much for coming on the program today. I really enjoyed the conversation.
Thank you, Grant. This was a pleasure. I had a lot of fun being here. Thank you.
You're welcome, and I'll definitely ask you back, okay?
Yeah, I'd love to be back. This was a lot of fun.
Yeah, perfect. Well, hey, ladies and gentlemen, check out RedMonocle. Did I say that right, Sean?
RedMonocle. Red like the color, monocle like an eyeglass. RedMonocle.com.
Perfect. Check them out. A great organization. You heard it here. And ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. This has been really absolutely a fantastic episode. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. I really enjoyed talking with Sean. Insightful stuff. And I can tell you that I'm actively seeking and have lined up some more experts. We're going to have some great episodes coming up. So I hope that you'll share, tell your friends, subscribe. And I sure want to thank you for listening to Talking Cloud. And we'll see you on the next episode. So take care.
Yeah.